Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce this Theater Library Association event tonight entitled Performing Arts Scholarship in the Digital Age, a conversation with James Wilson and Polly Thistlethwaite. Thank you, James and Polly, for joining us this evening. James Wilson is Professor of English and Theater at LaGuardia Community College and the Graduate Center of the University of New York. He is currently the Executive Director of the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies. All of his areas of interest are fascinating. Polly Thistlethwaite, we've just reconnected after many, many years, reminiscing about times way back when at NYU. But she is now the Chief Librarian at the CUNY Graduate Center. She has worked with CUNY Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies and the Lesbian Her Story Archives. So warm welcome to both of you for what we know will be a very engaging discussion on digital access and the performing arts. James, welcome you to the podium.
Good evening. On behalf of Polly and myself, we want to thank you for inviting us to speak on this austere occasion, and we want to especially thank Kevin Winkler and Tiffany Nixon for organizing and reaching out to us. And on a personal note, excuse me, I just want to say that I've been attending the TLA Book Awards for almost 20 years, so this is a really special honor for me. And I didn't even have to write a book in the last year to be here. Before I begin, I just want to say, while I was preparing this talk today, I felt positively antediluvian. I just felt that I just kept hearing this old man voice in my head saying, EBSCO host, in my day, we had the big green Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. So what I would like to do today is share with you one aspect of a particular project that I worked on that began as a dissertation and then was published as a book 10 years later. And in that 10 years, my own research strategies had just shifted almost completely. So I'd like to just focus on one particular aspect of that project, give you a little bit of information about the figure, and then talk about how I had done the research in the 1990s and how the landscape had completely changed by the mid-2000s. Right. So the chapter that I'm focusing on is called In My Well of Loneliness, Gladys Bentley's Boldykin Blues. As I said, this started out as a chapter in the dissertation and then became a chapter in the book. And the focus of the chapter is on a performer named Gladys Bentley. And Gladys Bentley was an African-American, very out lesbian blues and jazz singer of the 1920s and 1930s. She was born in Philadelphia in 1907. Later on, she claimed to have been born in Trinidad. Part of the problem with Gladys Bentley was she kept reinventing herself. So problems with the research had to do trying to figure out what was actually real and what wasn't. She died in 1960 of influenza. Gladys Bentley was particularly known for her ribald songs and performance wearing a white tuxedo, and her nightclub acts always featured a pansy chorus, a group of very effeminate men behind her. And she was very controversial among the critics. Many of the critics, and I know there's a lot of text there and that violates PowerPoint rules, but just to give you a sense of the criticism that she got, people talked about her size and they talked about her lewdness. They were also rather disgusted by her performance of sexuality. But Gladys Bentley was a big star in Harlem of the 1930s, and she filled the nightclubs for a number of years. One of the ways that I found Gladys Bentley was working in the archive, and I was particularly drawn to performances that related to a gay and lesbian Harlem. And in the 1930s, there was a gay subculture, particularly in Harlem, but also in the West Village as well. And there were pansy balls or drag balls in which thousands of people would gather, and there were contests for these cross-dressed people, and they attracted people from all social circles who would go up to Harlem to see these drag balls. Also, there were drag performances on the vaudeville stages and in the burlesque houses as well. So Gladys Bentley fit very well into that milieu. There was not a whole lot. When I first started working on Gladys Bentley, there was very little. So I started working on this chapter about the mid-1990s. And at that point, George Chauncey's Gay New York had come out, and there were several references to Gladys Bentley. And Eric Garber, a historian, wrote an important piece called Gladys Bentley, the Bulldagger Who Sang the Blues, which was published in Outlook magazine in 1988. And this really thrust Gladys Bentley into the spotlight. My background is theater and performance, so I was interested in looking at Gladys Bentley not necessarily from a historical perspective or from a historian's perspective, but from theater and performance. So try to get a sense of what she was actually like in performance. Before I talk more about the research process, just let me conclude with one element about Gladys Bentley. She published an autobiographical article in Ebony in the 1950s, and at that point she was trying to salvage her career, and she wrote an article in which she renounced her previous life, and you can see there she is in the right-hand slide, wearing dresses, preparing meals for her husband. So she claims that through hormones and the love of a good man, she was able to be a woman again. And I would say this was part of the game that Gladys Bentley played. So in terms of my research in the 1990s, my main work was done in university and public libraries and working with microfilm. So here's an example of microfilm, which you may recall. The quality varied from completely illegible to this one, which was pretty good. And I remember when I first started, those old cranks, you have to go page by page, year by year, reel by reel to find the information because they wouldn't automatically go to the particular places or the particular dates. And I remember I was so thankful when libraries started to get the automatic forward and reverse, although I can't tell you how many spools I let run out working through those microfilms. So that was the first place that I did my research. I also relied a lot on the research centers, particularly the Schomburg and the New York, Performing Arts Library were crucial to my work, and using clippings files. And I remember those days of getting those clippings files, and they would just crumble as I opened. I'd leave wearing half of the newspapers, it seemed. And sometimes just waiting 20 to 30 minutes for the clippings file to come up, and you'd get something like that, just those skimpy clippings. And continuing work with the microfilm, some had the reverse negative. So just dealing with the archive could be quite difficult indeed. I particularly enjoyed working with special collections. So looking at, for example, the Alexander Gumby scrapbook, which is at Columbia, to get a sense of the performances, get a sense of the work. Carl Van Vechten kept a scrapbook. This one has absolutely nothing to do with Gladys Bentley, as you can see, but it gives you an idea that the scrapbooks often told more about the person keeping the scrapbook than the performances themselves. And Carl Van Vechten had a couple of different scrapbooks, and one of them was devoted to male pulchritude. And this particular scrapbook had lots of nude photos and lots of very cheeky captions to go with those. So I eventually finished actually I should probably go back. I finished the dissertation chapter, and honestly, at the time, I thought it was pretty good. Looking back at it now, it wasn't much clearer than some of those very shady microfilm images that I had looked at. I didn't really develop much beyond what Eric Garber had found. My research, I think, was perfectly adequate, but as I said, it really didn't, I wasn't able to find a whole lot of new stuff. But I completed the dissertation, defended the dissertation, immediately sent it out, and Michigan Press expressed some interest in it until the readers' reports came back. And they were pretty devastating, pretty demoralizing. At that point, I just started teaching at LaGuardia, so I thought, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with the major revision that would be necessary to turn it into a book. So it lived on my desktop computer collecting data dust for about 5 years before I could go back to it and first realize that the readers were absolutely right and that I would need to go back into the archive and do a whole lot of new research. And that was about 2006. I read the other day that there are two kinds of researchers. There are data natives, or those people who are who have learned digital natives, I should say, who learned about digital research as they were coming up as scholars. And then there are digital immigrants, people who had to adopt their styles of research to the new forms of digital media. And I was, at that time, fresh off the boat, abandoned at Ellis Island. So I was very new to this media. But I quickly found out what an incredible opportunity I had. So now, working with the New York Public Library as a scholar, I had access to the databases, particularly the historical newspapers, and was able to use the Black historical newspapers, use keyword searches. All of a sudden, at the tips of my fingers, I could come up with hundreds of articles related to my topic, rather than having to sift through reel by reel, page by page of the microfilm. Also, song lyrics started to be much more readily available. So there were songs that were attributed to Gladys Bentley, and I didn't have anything but titles, but now I actually had some of the lyrics, and this is one of the more printable lyrics of Gladys Bentley. In addition to the databases for newspapers, there were now digital images that were widely available. So I could very easily access Yale's collection and again had access to images that I really didn't know existed before or weren't so readily available to me before. But now I was able to actually get to those images from my own computer. Video had also developed. There were two items that I desperately wanted when I was working on the dissertation. One was Gladys Bentley's autobiography. Apparently she had written an autobiography called If This Be Sin before she died. It seems to be completely lost, still haven't found it. And there was notice that she appeared on Groucho Marx's show in 1958. I went to at that point it was the Museum of Television and Radio, could not find any existence of this particular appearance on the Groucho Marx show. 10 years later, it was on commercial DVD, and I was able to actually see Gladys Bentley in performance. The other thing that happened was eBay. People were putting artifacts on eBay for sale. So I have now a clearer picture of Gladys Bentley through postcards from the Ubangi Club, which was the club in which she was most famous for performing, matchbooks as well. And then finally, the scrapbooks that I had been working with now were online websites. So people, fans or scholars, were keeping their own digital archives. So there's this fabulous website now devoted to Gladys Bentley from Queer Music Heritage and maintained by J.D. Doyle. Rather than the static scrapbooks that I was looking at, these are much more dynamic, and they keep accumulating and enhanced. So I think I'm pretty much out of time, but let me just offer a few final thoughts about what it means to do this research and what is gained and what is lost. Certainly, I am, and Polly will talk a little bit about this in her talk about access, but as an academic having an institution, I have all kinds of access, and it's very easy to actually get a hold of these materials. There's also an immediacy and proprietorship that I can access many materials much more quickly and actually download them or send them to myself as in emails. There's also shared materials and collaboration, so working with other scholars is much easier than it was before. In terms of what is lost, I'll say, and this probably dates me a bit, I miss working with those scrapbooks. I miss actually holding Carl Van Vechten's diary in my hand and experiencing the aura of the archive. I also think that there's something lost in terms of the labor of the research. At the end of the day, after going through all of those microfilm pages, I felt when I'd found that gem that I had really done something. And then finally, I don't have the opportunity to work with librarians as much as I used to, who were an incredible resource, who could say, oh, you might want to check out the Donald Vining papers in the New York Public Library, and pointing to other resources. So those are, I think, some of the trade-offs. But in terms of the scholarship, certainly I think the portrait of somebody like Gladys Bentley comes through much more clearly as a result of this shift. Okay? Thank you.
Fascinating, Jim. I have worked with him in the same building for years, and I haven't known what you're up to. I did read your dissertation back in the day, or parts of it, when I came on board at the grad center, because who else would have had an opportunity? I mean, where else? A student in 2000 writing about the Harlem Renaissance and queer performers? Amazing. So it was a fascinating dissertation, and I'm sorry that it was away from from publication for so long, but I'm glad you got it together. Thank you, Jim, for inviting me and for having me here. This is kind of a mashup performance of some things I've been working on. I'm the chief librarian at the CUNY Graduate Center, and we're just bringing up a institutional repository to house our theses and dissertations, and we are also going to introduce faculty scholarship into that repository. So these arguments are at my fingertips here, so I'm just going to share them with you. Here's the old serial and monograph expenditures chart over spanning my sordid career in libraries. You can see that the serial expenditures have just eaten away at what we have to spend in academic libraries, and the monograph purchases have, increased only very modestly, but very stable. So this puts, this shift in the kinds of buying power that libraries have means that, the way that the production of scholarship is heavily impacted as well. There aren't as many academic books being published and distributed in traditional formats. So academic library subscriptions make up about 75% of revenues for journal publishers. Did you know that? It's incredible. And the publisher profit margins are extremely high. These are our commercial publisher friends, Springer, Elsevier, Taylor and Francis. There's some hissing there from the, but this is dated data. It's from 2007 or 8, and I was checking the Elsevier profit margins, and it's in the 37-38% range. So this basically means that anything that we pay, okay, CUNY pays, my university pays Elsevier about $8.04 million for Science Direct over a period of years. And million. Did I say billion? I said million, Kenneth. But what happens to that 8.02 million is that 3.03 or something like that, of that million, 37% of that goes directly into Elsevier shareholder pockets. So that means that all of our retirement plans should contain some Elsevier stock because it's recession-proof, profits are great, they're making a lot of money, even as we start to shift our practices of scholarly communication. Librarians in the room will recognize this, and probably scholars as well. This is what you get when you look at my library's holdings for Theater Journal. You want to know how many ways you can get Theater Journal at the Grad Center? Well, there are 3 ways you can get it online. You can get it through JSTOR, or you can get it through Project Muse, and there's a ton of overlap, but we have to have that overlap because Project Muse is the current, contains the current stuff, and the JSTOR contains the archival stuff. And then we have this other random subscription from Gale that just has these 2 years, so it's weird. So this is a result of the bundling that our friends in publishing provide to us. Less and less, academic libraries purchase less and less, except for if you're at some libraries who are bucking the trend. But we purchase less and less, fewer and fewer individual subscriptions, and what has happened is that we buy journals in huge packages, and it's not a kind of package that we can go and design and pick out. It's a package that is kind of, it's got some of the things that we want and a whole bunch of titles that we don't want. So we end up buying in these large lots, these very odd lots, and paying a pretty good price for JSTOR and Project Muse at CUNY. I mean, JSTOR is in the $300,000 to $400,000 per year range, and Muse is in the $180,000 to $190,000 range. So it's not cheap. Not cheap. When Theater Journal you can buy for $170 a year, having to, in order to get a decent profile of theater journals, you have to buy a huge couple or 3 of these packages. But readers only just want unfettered access to whatever it is they want to read. That's all they want. And authors want, generally, academic authors like Jim, I think, he wants readers, and he wants to have impact. My friends were teasing me that everybody's talking about impact and impactful, and so and my staff has started to call it impactfulicious. Impactfulicious. This is a graphic by my awesome colleague Jill Ciricella. She made the content, and our graphic designer at the Just Publics 365 program, Les LaRue, just prettied it up. But basically, we've got the university and funding institutions with the dollars, and we use these dollars to pay faculty, hired working faculty, to do research and reports, mostly, but I understand in the performing arts there's a little hybridization going on, but mostly faculty give away articles and their copyright to publishers for free. Not a lot of compensation for peer review here in the humanities, and we give away our work. And then publishers rake in the bucks with margins high in the cases of some commercial publishers, and then we can't afford it. The libraries can't afford to buy these, huge, well-packaged or not so well-packaged subscriptions. And so the small libraries like Tiffany's ends up not being really able to afford or provide subscriptions for researchers affiliated with her library. So, open access scholarship the open access movement began in the 90s as a way to try to address the high prices and the problems that, the crises basically that libraries are facing. One route to open access publishing is called Gold Open Access, and it's epitomized by the titles featured in the directory of open access journals. This Gold Open Access route, where a journal completely publishes in open access with sometimes authors paying fees to support the publication up front. This is this Gold Open Access model is one that's more popular in Europe than it is in the States, but it's a hybrid on all across the world. But you can see, we've got the Danish Journal of Film Studies here. There are 30 performing arts titles in the DOAJ right now. And then there's Green Open Access route, which is kind of like gaining favor in North American academic libraries. How many have used this Sherpa Romeo tool? You ever seen it? Linda? This is, it's maintained by a British library, not the British Library, I think it's Manchester, but I'd have to check my notes, apologies. But basically it's a tool where you can look up the standing copyright and self-archiving policies for about 1,800 journals. So most journals here will allow some version of the scholar's work to be self-archived, say in an institutional repository or on an author's website, but there are certain conditions on that. Some journals say, oh, you can only publish the PDF that we produced. That's the only thing you can put out there or we're going to have a problem with you. Some of them say you can only publish the non-PDF that was post-refereed. Who's got a file of that stuff? I mean, it's hard, it's difficult to sort through, and the problem is that many scholars don't consciously keep these kinds of personal archives of their work. 87% of the publishers in the Sherpa Romeo database allow there to be either version, post-refereed or the published PDF. And if you can include the articles that are listed in Sherpa Romeo that can be self-archived after an embargo period from, say, 6 months to 2 years, then that raises the total to 94% of publishers allow some version, post-refereed version, to appear in an individual archive. So there's a great opportunity here to support both the subscription-based models of our journals and then to self-archive and to allow global readership and greater impact for our academic work. So Sherpa Romeo, I'm going backwards, has this little coding system for coding the kinds of the terms under which you can self-archive. Green is the most liberal, where you can do anything. Blue is where you have to have a post-print of the post-refereed version. And yellow is that you have to have a pre-refereed version. And this is what you get up. If you look up Theater Journal here, this is the way that the Sherpa Romeo display looks. So this is a green journal. It's pretty great. So the author can archive a pre-refereed print if you want to, or a post-refereed version if you want to, either one. Like, let's say you have an article that's 11,000 words, and you want to archive that. Like, say, I don't know, like I have an article in process. It's got a ton of German footnoting, and in order to get it, Theater Journal to look at it, I'm going to have to bring it down to 9,000 words. But I could, according to their rules, publish my longer version, and they wouldn't have a problem with it. Or I could self-archive the longer version. If a publisher you want to work with is not listed in Sherpa Romeo, or if, say, they're a book publisher, you can you can check the SPARC and the CIC website. CIC is the current organization that used to be called the Big Ten. And they have these ready-made, like dense legalese contracts that allow you to present them to publishers, and so that so you can start to negotiate if you can keep your copyright and preserve your right to self-archive. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of repositories out there building. We're familiar with some of them, but they come in all different sizes and flavors. And of course, not everybody's on board. This is Kit Hume, who is she writes a blog. The professor is, she wrote a guest blog on The Professor Is In, but she writes a lot of material offering advice to graduate students particularly, and she suggests that, given the current environment with academic publishers not publishing so many works, that if your dissertation, Jim, should have been made available, open access, you may have ruined your chance of getting that book published. Now, I was happy to hear you say, or I noted that you said that the primary issue with your dissertation, according to the publishers, was that it just needed to be revised and sort of more deeply researched. But they didn't really talk about, the fact that your dissertation was available in the ProQuest repository. That wasn't an issue, right? Anyhow, but because of the academic advisors in, say, the Grad Center's theater department, sending around to graduate student listservs the kind of advice here that you see here. It's not just Kit Hume. It's like there's a ton of advisors suggesting that it's dangerous or personally risky for students to publish open access. So most theater grads, and we're talking about classes from 5 to 12 here, but most grad students embargo their dissertations, so they keep it from being in either open access or even in the private commercial repositories for a period of 6 to 2 years. And if that weren't enough, the AHA this summer said, 2 years is not enough. You need to, libraries, you are, putting your grad students at risk, and you need to give them the option of embargoing their dissertations for 6 years. But I don't know of a university that's really doing that yet. I just wanted to throw in here, here's the mashup part, that resource sharing, interlibrary loan, is the original gangster of open access. I was at Colorado State University in '97 when there was this huge flood, and there's nothing to get you on the interlibrary loan train like a flood that washes your entire library out. So research libraries have been doing this interlibrary loan, this like incredible article sharing. The interlibrary loan network that we're part of here in the CUNY and the Grad Center is called the IDS network, and it's SUNY-based, and look at the growth on this thing. We are whizzing around PDFs like nobody's business. We are whizzing them around. We have the ability, librarians, to make this demand-driven article access the standard. We have the ability, but we haven't done it. The publishers are packaging in a way, in these big deal ways, that kind of prevent us from doing the on-demand, data-driven, smorgasbord kind of selection that would allow our libraries to define exactly what it is we need, or say divide our subscriptions among a collective so that we could whiz around PDFs. Anyhow, there are forces at work that are countering our network sharing sensibilities. Anyhow, this is what the next time you write, Jim, you can just put your work out in a comments press format. You don't have to wait for the reviewers. You can have the reviewers come to you online. And this is kind of scary, I think, because the people who have done it, who I've heard talk about, say it's intense. You know, you're getting criticism, live time. You're not, the work doesn't rest. You have to respond to it. You have to work with it. It stays with you. So with that, I'll invite Jim to come back, and we can ask each other some questions and invite your heckling and intercession and comments and political statements here. Thank you. So Jim, you were really brave to put your, to tell us about your revision process and to admit that it took 5 years to get it to the publisher.
Yeah, well, as I say, they were right.
Isn't that something? I mean, if you were on Oprah, you would be getting lots of claps right now.
No, it also took me about 4 or 5 years to see that they were right. When I first wrote it, I thought, you know, I was practicing my Pulitzer Prize speech. And then when the reviews, the reader reports came back, I was completely demoralized, couldn't look at it for 4 or 5 years.
Would you have ever thought to put your dissertation in wider circulation, or would that have been some weird thing to do?
I honestly, and I know that I began as kind of a Luddite, particularly in 2000 I was. I mean, I wouldn't even have known how to do that if there was such a thing.
I don't think we had that in 2000.
Yeah. So I may have, but I think I also confess, I love books. So from the beginning, I had my heart set on having a book, and I agree with so much of the importance of open access, but at the end of the day, I wanted that book to hold.
Could you have it both ways?
If I could have it both ways, I would. Yeah. And actually now we can, because there's so many electronic books available.
But you don't want just the electronic book. You've got to have the hold it in your hand thing. That's the thing that's real. It makes it, that's what you send Mom.
Mm-hmm. What do the libraries buy? Well, now let me ask you a question, Polly. I know we don't do it for the money. But what does this mean for royalties? I mean, what would this mean if one were to go either partially or fully open access? Would there be any royalties or remuneration? Well,
you know, do you want to talk about dissertation publishing, or
either one?
The Kathleen Fitzpatrick's planned obsolescence, that the open comment press item that I showed has also has a parallel successful print run. It's in its like 3rd printing. It's in NYU Press. Do we have anybody from NYU? It's NYU Press. It's a top seller in paper format. And they've got library editions and the paperbacks, and it's online for free with comments.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather read it in a book, frankly. I mean, I would rather read that.
Rather than.
But if I were like an invested, you know, reader, I might want to go on there and get into the text. But I think there's like, you know, cable shows. You know, there's just like a multiplicity of formats for your scholarship that are possible. Does it threaten the academic publishing model? Yeah, it does. It means that something's got to change.
Right.
But I don't think it means that, you know, every media format is going to be, any media format is going to be obsolete.
Right. And I guess the other concern from the perspective of the academic, and I think this goes to Kate Hume's point, there's a real concern that if it's not published as a traditional book, that it doesn't go through the process of readers' reviews, readers' reports, etc., that one can be jeopardizing chances for promotion and tenure.
Well, you know, remember when we were in your office Monday or Tuesday, and Benjamin Gillespie in the program, he said, "Hey, Polly, you should read this thing." Did he send that to you?
Yeah, the white paper,
That
the
white
ASTR
paper?
Alpha white paper.
Yeah, from August 2013. It was a report of the committee of the A-STAR and ATAG joint effort. But what that paper said was that it was to encourage the profession, the senior advisors, to shift the way that digital, or to appreciate digital scholarship in its many formats, and to accommodate digital scholarship in tenure, promotion, and review processes. So, you know, we've got advisors saying, let's, you know, stop the train and you know, bury your dissertations, you know, keep them away from prying eyes and interested readers. And then we've got, you know, the committees of scholars who seemingly want to work in digital formats, saying, you know, let's put it up to the academy to shift the way that our work is evaluated and the way that we get reviewed. So I think, you know, it's acknowledging the same problem, but it's coming at it from two different directions, right?
So it's changing the culture, and the academic culture has to change. We're both in a university, and I wonder, maybe you could say a little bit about, because this is something that I think about, how to train my students who are digital natives compared to the digital immigrant. How do we train our students to do this kind of research, to do the electronic and digital research? I mean, do you work with students?
I do, but you know, that's a question that you might. I wouldn't propose to have any expertise. I was the range of archival work that you did over this decade is stunning. I mean, I would be more interested to hear, like, what would it be for you to, like, you know, stumble upon collectors' digital archives, and were you able to trust digital archives as much as you would, say, you know, face to face with Kevin there, you know, saying this is the provenance,
right.
This is the, you know, this is the New York Public Library says this is where it comes from, versus, you know, the guy with the matchbooks, who just, you know, maybe he photoshopped that Gladys Bentley on that matchbook.
No, and that's a real issue, and it's one that I struggle with, because just to think about my work in the classroom. I mean, I remember when I was in the classroom, the teacher wrote something on the board, and I immediately pulled out my notebook and I wrote it dutifully down into my notebook. They pull out their iPhones and take a picture of the board. So the way they are researching is very different, and you're absolutely right. Students think, well, if it's on the internet, then it must be true, it must be real. So that is, I think, certainly an issue in terms of working with students.
Yeah, I think we all have to get smarter and more conversant with you know, the location and the production of digital culture. It has to become part of the pedagogy. I think we've spent, in my 25 years, however long in libraries, you know, we used to try to say, okay, well, if you find something on the internet, you know, you can't really trust it. You know, you should use a library index for trustworthy material. But anymore, the distinctions are they just can't be parsed in that very simplistic way. I mean, there have to be much more sophisticated judgments made about what's what and who's doing it, and right?
Was that a cutoff sign that I just...
That,
so I
mean, that was kind of harsh. I guess Tiffany didn't like that. Okay.
I'm brutal.
So this concludes the conversation portion.
All right, now...
I was just letting you know that we were near the end.
I know, we shouldn't be so sensitive.
So let's open up, because I'm sure there are many people that have questions. So
or your own comments, or
comments.
Or I know that many of you are.
State then, because I think we can hear each other.
But I think to get it out of the earpiece, you might need to say it into the mic.
I'm happy to get up and do that.
Well, they can repeat the question.
Yeah, I can repeat the question. Okay. I have a question for Holly, and certainly Jim, if you want to comment. So the publishing models are continuing to change, and I think that we've seen a really radical transition to e-journal content in terms of acceptance of using e-journal content, both from the creators, the publishers, and then those of us who access that content. The e-book is I think it's in the flux transition right now. But in the discussion about open access, somebody's got to pay for publishing. So how do you see either larger consortium or sustainable models that can sort of absorb the ongoing costs of maintaining these collections in this kind of new model? I mean, outside of publishers like Elsevier who have these enormous profit margins, it's not the case for all publishers. And there are a lot of academic publishers or associations that have publications that are really sort of struggling with how to bridge this, both the electronic access and the print access.
Yeah, I don't think that there's not a clear winning model for that right now. But what I've seen work, say at Purdue University, is this sort of collaboration between the publisher, the press and the library, or the press and a repository, so that the university, the academic press, has some institutional support for the infrastructure that they need to publish in open access contents. They have context, they have review procedures kind of built in, and then they can make their work, or they can accomplish their work in open access contexts, but with a different kind of institutional support. So it's not so much coming from the reader side, but it's being supported by the university. But the university then doesn't have to pay twice to buy it back in the library. But I don't think there's any clear, this is the way to do it and maintain or make money. I think there are probably as many failures in those attempts as there are successes at this point. But anyway, that's like the general idea, as I understand it.
And I would just say, one of the other hats that I wear, I'm the co-editor of Journal of American Drama and Theater, JADT, and we are just now going fully digital. And I confess that we had been holding out for some time. We, again, because we're academics, we love those hard journals. But the university had pretty much said to us that they can't afford those journals anymore. So this is certainly much more cost effective, and we have been, my co-editor and I, have been completely won over because it means that it's going to be a much more dynamic journal. It's going to be, I think, easier for us to edit, and it's going to maintain the rigor of the peer review. So we don't think anything will be lost in going fully digital.
And there was a question over here.
I was going to take it back. Well,
No, you can't take it back.
I had a question, sort of, I am kind of new because I'm a librarian, but you were talking about royalties for the author, and I was just thinking that my academic advisor, who's a book historian, her book's amazing, but her royalty check this year was like $130.
Wow, she did great.
Shoes. Anyways, so that's like part of my question is like it's unfortunate that authors aren't getting more royalty from their work. If that's really the money is the issue with the publishing thing. And the other part of it is, I guess I was sort of curious to the group why there's so much fear about the dissertation being public. Like, for me, that just makes absolutely no sense, and I'm still sort of trying to look at those things that are written and be like, I'm still very unclear why this is Like, what is the issue?
I'll do the first one. I'll do
Okay.
the royalties. You're right, the royalties are minuscule, but I think that most academics would say that really the book is more useful for the promotion that can come from it. And speaking engagements. So you may make, wow, $130 would be nice every 6 months, but it's more about the other things that come with the book. So dissertation theories.
I don't know, I could ask my colleagues in the audience what fears advisors have about publishing dissertations. Have you heard any?
Well, I think the
Work
idea,
gets ripped off, you know. I
Plagiarism.
think that's the big issue. You want, I mean, after you've put all that time, effort, and energy into doing your dissertation, even if, as Jim did, by the way, I loved your presentation. Boy, did that bring me back to my dissertation, let me tell you, and using the clippings files here. But you want to make, I mean, that's your first major piece of research as a fledgling scholar. You want to have ownership of that and get it out there so you can get that first hurdle into an assistant professorship or tenure or something of that nature.
My excellent colleague Jill Ciricella put her master's thesis online, and somebody plagiarized it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know what? They caught it. You know why? Because it was online. I mean, I think that there is a greater chance of plagiarism being successful if something is not digitally accessible and checkable. The minute you've got something online, you know, the
do
Google
a search.
those things can be compared. It marks you as the owner of these ideas and these sentences and at this period in time. You know, and plagiarists are persistent, you know, and they're not going to stop because something's online. I mean, or because it's kind of crazy, plagiarism to a great extent. So there's not always rationality behind it. But I'm sure that there's a great deal more plagiarism of academic work that we haven't discovered because it's not available to check.
I think we have room for one more.
Yeah, I'm just curious, and this is a question for both of you, James, particularly as an editor of a scholarly journal that is now considering the digital possibilities.
Well, no, we've considered we're going there.
My question, though, is about alternative formats. So are there hyperlinks in these articles? Are there objects like videos and animations and, you know, data, I guess data animations is what I'm thinking of. I think that there are a lot of possibilities, and I'm wondering if you've seen much of that, and if you have any thoughts about where it's going.
Well, in terms of our first issue, we are not doing that. We're working from a template that won't allow that. But that is exactly why we're excited about the opportunity to go digital, especially for theater and performance, so that you write an article and rather than having to have pages and pages of describing the performance, you just link to a video of the performance, for instance. So I do think that there are ways that the scholarship can be much more interactive in that regard. So no, we're not doing that, but I'm excited about that possibility.
I think open access publishing has great promise for the alternative publications or the smaller journals that don't get bundled in, or they get bundled in only occasionally into the things that libraries buy. So I think it has great promise for the work that we're doing in small departments and small groups with not so much money, but great ideas.
Yeah.
We have maybe one quick question. Anyone? There was one over here. I'm sorry.
oh, I was just going to comment on the question of why it was important not to put your dissertation up if you want to get tenure. And I think the notion that to get tenure you need to be published by a peer-reviewed publisher has been very enduring, and that fear is based on the idea of if you're going to put something up for free, what publisher is going to take it?
That's the fear.
That's the
Well,
fear.
Look, we have
So,
hands there.
I used to work for Cambridge University Press, and now I'm an assistant professor at Hostos Community College. And in my time at Cambridge, I never saw any dissertation just go through as is. So I think that fear is somewhat unfounded. Even if your book is based on your dissertation, it's going to be heavily revised.
In my dissertation, well, not, it was before there was even a question about ProQuest, I believe. It went to UMI, so people could, they could buy a copy of my dissertation, and so there was, the people had access to it.
Anything else very quickly? Yes.
Well, I work in film and television, and the film and television distribution model is going through exactly this shift. And just like the publishers, these greedy bastards, the distributors are also, you know, trying to bilk everybody. You know, they're trying to bilk
Like
the audience.
Cablevision, you mean? Like cable?
Yeah, you know, they're trying to bilk the audience and rake in as much money as they can. And of course, they're trying to screw the producers who are actually doing the hard work of making the content in the first place, and then crying that they don't have enough money to, you know, so you get the equivalent of a $130 check every 6 months for 3 to 5 years of your life. But there is this new model of open access, and I can tell you the filmmakers are actually embracing it because they're finding that if they can connect to an audience, the audience will actually pay them directly. You know, so you give away your work for free for a limited period of time, and then if people like it, they'll buy it. There's a whole hybrid distribution model that's emerging now. And all these same fears of like, oh my God, if I make this available for free, a distributor is going to look the other way, or I'm never going to make it in business. Those fears are actually proving to be somewhat unfounded also, because it's much better to come to a distributor for your next project and say, well, you know, I had 700,000 hits on YouTube and I made, you know, more money than if I went to some.
Yeah, my dissertation was downloaded 800 times. Don't you want to publish it?
Yeah, and so.
Unedited, unrevised?
So I just want to say that there's a lot of hope.
Yeah, no, it's a great
Out
point.
there.
So all this experimentation is taking place in different arenas, related arenas too. Great point.
I think we're at close. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank